For 14 straight days, my wife didn't speak a single word to me. 14 days of heavy silences, dramatic door slams, and cold stares across the dinner table. It was a calculated psychological game. Chloe believed that if she froze me out long enough, I'd crumble. She thought I'd crawl on my knees and hand over 30% of my family company's voting shares just to make her smile again. She picked the wrong man to manipulate. To me, her silent treatment wasn't a punishment. It was the most peaceful 2 weeks of my life. Tonight, she finally broke her own rule. We were sitting in the private dining room of Le Petit Miroir, an elite restaurant where the tasting menu costs more than an average mortgage payment. Naturally, I paid for it. Chloe set her champagne flute down on the white tablecloth with a sharp, deliberate click. She leaned back, crossing her arms, wearing a triumphant smirk that made her look entirely ridiculous. "So, Leo," she began, her tone dripping with fake, patronizing sympathy. "It's been 2 weeks. Are you ready to talk like a civilized adult? Or are you going to keep wallowing in your miserable isolation?" I didn't answer right away. I casually picked up my steak knife, carving a precise, perfectly silvered slice of rare Wagyu beef. I chewed slowly, savored the flavor, and dabbed the corner of my mouth with a linen napkin. My pulse didn't jump a single beat. My face remained an unreadable mask of clinical detachment. "I haven't been wallowing, Chloe," I said smoothly, resting my hands flat on the table. "I've been enjoying the quiet. You should try it more often." Her smirk flickered for a microsecond before her eyes hardened with dark, manipulative fury. She snapped her spine straight, adjusting her diamond necklace. "A gift bought with my corporate black card." "Don't play word games with me," she hissed, leaning over the table. "You know exactly why I stopped talking to you. You rejected my mother's seat on the board. You blocked my brother's investment proposal. You treat my family like outsiders while you sit on a mountain of wealth. I treat your family like poor financial risks," I replied, dropping a razor-sharp smirk. "Because that is precisely what they are. Your brother wanted $50 million for a crypto scheme. Your mother thinks an executive board seat comes with free shopping sprees." "They're my family, Leo," Chloe barked, her voice rising enough to draw glances from the surrounding tables. "A real husband supports his wife's bloodline. But you're selfish. You're cold. You think money makes you immune to consequences. Money makes me immune to bad investments," I corrected flatly. "There is a distinct legal difference." Chloe let out a harsh, hysterical laugh. She reached into her leather handbag, pulled out a folded piece of stationery, and slapped it onto the center of the table right next to my wine glass. "I'm done waiting, Leo," she declared, her eyes flashing with arrogant confidence. "This is my final condition. You transfer 15% of Vance Logistics equity to my private trust by tomorrow morning, or I walk out that door. I will file for a high-profile divorce, drag your name through the mud, and take half of everything you own." She sat back, resting her chin on her hand, expecting me to panic. She expected sweat on my brow, a stammering apology, or a desperate plea to save our 3-year marriage. I almost laughed at how predictable she was. I didn't flinch. I didn't reach for the paper. Instead, I unbuttoned my suit jacket, reached into my breast pocket, and pulled out a crisp, heavy white envelope. I laid it on the table right beside her ultimatum. "What is that?" Chloe demanded, her eyebrows knitting together in confusion. "Your wish granted," I murmured softly. I reached out, picked up my wine glass, and raised it toward her in a silent, mocking toast. "Open it, Chloe." With trembling fingers, she snatched the envelope, tore open the seal, and pulled out the legal documents inside. Her eyes scanned the bold headers at the top of page 1. "Petition for dissolution of marriage. Pre-nuptial agreement enforcement Exhibit A." Her face instantly drained of all color. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "Is this a pre-signed divorce agreement?" she stammered, her voice squeaking in sheer, unbelievable shock. "Fully executed by my legal team 3 days ago," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet room like shattered glass. "You thought your 2 weeks of silence was a punishment, Chloe. In reality, it gave my forensic accountants enough time to audit every transaction you made through my secondary accounts." "Leo, wait," she whimpered, her arrogant posture completely collapsing. "This This isn't what I meant. I was just trying to make you listen. You gave me an ultimatum. I interrupted, leaning forward and staring into her bloodshot eyes with cold, unyielding authority. You said you were walking out that door. I agree to your terms. You get 0 equity, 0 board seats, and under Section 4 of our ironclad prenup, 0 spousal support. I slid the heavy silver pen across the tablecloth, stopping it right against her manicured fingertips. Sign the paperwork, Chloe. I commanded coldly. Your silent treatment is officially permanent. The heavy double oak doors of my grand foyer didn't just open. They slammed back against the marble walls with a sharp, echoes in the hallway's bang. I sat in the high-backed leather armchair in my living room, casually swirling a crystal tumbler of 18-year-old scotch. My suit jacket was unbuttoned, my ankles crossed. I looked like a man enjoying a peaceful Tuesday evening because that was precisely what I intended to do. Chloe stormed in first, her face red and blotchy from an hour of crying in her car. Right behind her was her mother, Victoria, a woman who treated social climbing like an Olympic sport, and Julian, Chloe's smug childhood friend who spent his days pretending to be an international venture capitalist on Instagram using his father's credit cards. There he is, Victoria shrieked, pointing a manicured, diamond-encrusted finger straight at my face. The ungrateful sociopath. How dare you try to throw my daughter out on the street with nothing after everything she sacrificed for you? Julian stepped forward, adjusting the lapels of his velvet blazer with a nauseating smirk. He looked around my 2,000-square-foot living room, taking in the vaulted ceilings, the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, and the custom artwork. Nice place you've been holding down, Leo, Julian drawled, his voice thick with condescending arrogance. Too bad your lease on luxury just expired. Chloe called me the second you pulled that stunt at the restaurant. You really thought a piece of paper would scare us? I don't play games intended to scare children, Julian, I said smoothly, taking a slow sip of my scotch. I execute business decisions. Why are you in my house? It won't be your house for long. Julian sneered, taking 3 confident steps toward my leather sofa and tossing his leather weekender bag right onto the silk upholstery. Under New York marital property laws, Chloe is entitled to equitable distribution. We've already discussed it. She gets the estate. And since she'll be needing emotional support during this traumatic transition, I'm moving into the guest wing tonight. I looked at Julian's bag resting on my silk sofa. I looked at Victoria's trembling rage, and then at Chloe, who was hiding behind her mother, crossing her arms with a sudden, ugly return of her entitled confidence. You're moving in? I asked, my voice flat, calm, and utterly devoid of fear. That's right, Victoria snapped, taking a step closer. And you are moving out, Leo, tonight, or I will call every gossip columnist in Manhattan and destroy your reputation before the market opens tomorrow morning. I almost laughed out loud at the sheer, unadulterated delusion standing in front of me. They truly believed they had engineered a masterstroke. I set my glass down on the mahogany side table with a quiet, deliberate clink. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a sleek digital tablet, and pressed a single button on the screen. The heavy front doors chimed twice. Marcus, my chief of private security, 6'4" and built like an armored vehicle, stepped into the foyer alongside 3 uniformed guards in dark tactical uniforms. Is there a problem, Chairman Vance? Marcus asked, his deep voice vibrating through the room. What is the meaning of this? Victoria screeched, backing up a step. Leo, call off these thugs right now. Julian, I said smoothly, ignoring the screaming old woman entirely. Did you bother reading the county land registry before you brought your luggage into my living room? Julian's smug smile twitched. What are you talking about? This property was acquired 5 years ago through Vance Private Holdings Trust, I said, tapping the tablet display to project a crisp, high-resolution document onto the wall-mounted media screen behind them. A premarital, fully sheltered asset funded entirely by my offshore capital. Chloe's name appears on 0 ownership documents. Her legal status in this building as of 8:30 p.m. is an unauthorized trespasser. Victoria stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a dying fish. That can't be legal. She lived here for 3 years. She resided here as a guest under my discretion, I corrected coldly. a discretion that has officially been revoked. I turned my eyes to Marcus. Officer, remove Mr. Vance's uninvited guests from the premises. Take that leather bag and throw it on the driveway. Touch my bag, and I'll sue you, Julian shouted, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine as Marcus stepped up, grabbed the strap of his luxury weekender, and casually tossed it through the open front doors. It tumbled across the stone driveway with a satisfying crunch. Hey, Julian yelled, scrambling backward as two security guards moved into his personal space. You can't do this. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent on my curb, I replied, dropping a razor-sharp smirk. Leo, please, Chloe suddenly screamed, watching Julian get physically herded out the door like a stray dog. You can't kick me out. Where am I supposed to go? Wherever your allowance permits, I said flatly. I picked up my tablet, opened the home automation master file, and selected the biometric access database. In 3 quick taps, I selected Chloe's facial scan, thumbprint authorization, and passcodes. I pressed delete. The digital wall panels in the foyer chimed loudly, flashing a bright, glowing red lock icon. Biometric access revoked, the automated system announced smoothly. Chloe gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. Victoria began shrieking threats about her attorneys, but Marcus and his team politely, firmly, and physically escorted all 3 of them out into the cool night air. The heavy double doors shut with an absolute, heavy thud. I picked up my scotch glass, walked over to the floor-to-ceiling glass window, and looked down. Outside, Julian was picking up his scuff bag from the driveway while Victoria and Chloe screamed hysterically at the locked iron gates. I took a slow sip of my 18-year-old scotch. The silence inside my mansion was absolute perfection. At 9:15 on a Thursday morning, the 64th floor of Vance Logistics was supposed to be reserved for quarterly revenue projections. Instead, the frosted glass doors of the grand executive boardroom flew open with a dramatic bang. 6 board members froze, coffee cups halfway to their lips. I didn't even twitch. I sat at the head of the dark marble table, leaning back in my executive leather swivel chair, slowly lacing my fingers together beneath my chin. Victoria marched in like a battle-tested general, wearing a neon pink tweed suit that looked entirely out of place against my minimalist corporate interior. Right beside her was Chloe, looking artfully disheveled in a high-collared black dress, her eyes downturned to fake a look of quiet, tragic abuse. Trailing 2 steps behind them was a sleazy man holding a portable camera rig with a brightly glowing recording light, a tabloid stringer from Manhattan Buzz. Gentlemen of the board, Victoria bellowed, her voice echoing off the glass paneling. Stop this meeting immediately. You are harboring a monster at the head of this table. Madam, Arthur Vance, my senior board member and granduncle, said, rising slightly from his seat with a scowl. This is a restricted corporate session. Security. Don't you dare call security. Chloe sobbed on cue, dabbing her dry eyes with a silk tissue. The public deserves to know the truth. Leo Vance is an abusive, cruel sociopath who threw his own wife onto the street in the middle of the night. The tabloid photographer aimed his wide-angle lens straight at my face. I didn't duck. I didn't hide behind a file folder. I simply turned my head, met the camera lens with an icy, razor-sharp smirk, and let them record every second. Is the camera catching my good side? I asked smoothly, my voice flat, calm, and entirely unbothered. Because if you're attempting a smear campaign, Chloe, at least make sure the lighting does justice to my suit. You think this is funny? Victoria shrieked, slamming both her hands down on the polished marble table directly across from me. We have records. We have statements. You kicked my daughter out of her home, froze her emergency credit cards, and forced her to sleep in a hotel. He is morally bankrupt. Members of the board, I demand an emergency vote to strip Leo Vance of his chief executive title immediately. The board members looked between Victoria's shrieking face and my absolute, unyielding composure. A few of them looked nervous. Arthur looked furious. Are you finished with your theatrical performance? I inquired softly, picking up the remote control for the dual wall-mounted 80-inch media screens behind me. Or, do you have a song and dance routine prepared for the chorus line? You can't sarcasm your way out of this, Leo. Chloe spat, her soft victim act slipping for a split second to reveal her sharp, ugly desperation. We are going live with this footage in 10 minutes. Your stock price will drop 10 points by noon. Then let's give the news network something truly sensational to report, I said. I clicked the silver button on the remote control. The quarterly revenue chart vanished from the dual screens. In its place appeared a bright, high-definition spreadsheet titled Internal Forensic Audit. Vance Logistics Charitable Foundation. Victoria's loud, hysterical breathing suddenly stopped. Her eyes widened, tracking the glowing red numbers flashing across the screen. What is that? She stammered, her voice dropping an octave as her face drained of color. This is your private registered nonprofit, the Victoria Sterling Foundation for Youth Arts. I explained smoothly, standing up from my chair with slow, deliberate grace. Over the past 24 months, 6 separate wire transfers totaling precisely $2.4 million left our corporate charitable allocation fund. I tapped the remote again. Curiously, I continued, pacing along the edge of the marble table. Those funds didn't buy paints or musical instruments for children. They were routed through a shell company in the Cayman Islands to pay off your personal credit line at Saks Fifth Avenue, a luxury yacht lease in Miami, and Julian's failed crypto exchange startup. The entire boardroom went dead quiet. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner 64 floors above the street. You hacked my private accounts? Victoria gasped, clutching her throat as she backed away from the marble table. That's illegal. That's corporate espionage. No, Victoria, I corrected flatly, resting my hands on the back of my leather chair. It's called a court-authorized audit. When Chloe tried to sue me for marital asset distribution on Tuesday, my legal team gained full discovery rights into every connected account. You didn't just steal from me. You stole from a publicly traded corporation. Leo, please, Chloe squeaked, stepping away from her mother as if Victoria were suddenly radioactive. I didn't know anything about this. I swear. Ignorance isn't a legal defense, Chloe, I said, dropping a cold, ruthless smirk. It's just your natural state of being. I looked toward the heavy glass doors of the boardroom. You can come in now, gentlemen. The doors slid open. 2 tall, dark-suited men carrying federal badges clipped to their lapels walked into the room, followed by 2 armed federal marshals. Victoria Sterling? The lead investigator asked crisply. I am Special Agent Miller with the Securities and Exchange Commission. You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and corporate embezzlement. Get your hands off me, Victoria screamed, kicking her heels as cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly around her manicured wrists. Leo, you bastard. You set me up. You set yourself up the moment you mistook my money for your personal piggy bank, I replied calmly. I turned my eyes to the terrified tabloid photographer, whose camera was now pointing at the floor. Make sure you get that on video, I told him smoothly. It's going to make a fantastic front page. At 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, Julian decided to stage his execution on live television. I sat in my corner office, 70 floors above Manhattan, holding an espresso cup. On the 80-inch wall monitor in front of me, the CNBC logo flashed red under a breaking news banner. Nexus Tech Takeover. Stolen sovereignty? Julian stood behind a mahogany podium at the Plaza Hotel's Grand Ballroom, bathed in flashbulbs. He wore a tailor-made suit he clearly couldn't afford, flashing a bright, camera-ready smile to dozens of financial journalists. Beside him sat Chloe, wearing dark sunglasses inside a dimly lit room to project the image of a betrayed corporate spouse. Today, I am exposing the real Leo Vance, Julian announced, his voice booming through the speakers. For 5 years, Vance Logistics has claimed ownership of the Aegis Security Core, the proprietary encryption engine powering 30% of global financial trades. But Leo Vance didn't write a single line of that code. I did. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. I didn't laugh out loud. I simply appreciated the pure, unadulterated comedic value of a man claiming he wrote high-level cryptographic algorithms when he barely knew how to set up a wireless router. Julian, Chloe chimed in, leaning toward a microphone with dramatic sorrow, tried to keep this private for years. But after Leo illegally locked me out of our estate and ruined my mother, we realized the public deserved the truth. We are officially filing for the immediate transfer of all Nexus Tech assets to our new firm, Apex Global. Julian held up a glowing silver flash drive. I have the full source repository right here. In 60 seconds, my tech team will deploy our sovereign patch to the public servers, proving complete control over the core architecture. The media room exploded into chatter. Below the live feed, Julian's dummy holding company stock ticker, already trading on OTC markets, spiked by 40%. They actually thought they had me cornered. They believed that because Chloe managed to copy a set of encrypted developer keys off my home server 3 months ago, they held the keys to my kingdom. Unbelievable, my chief technology officer murmured, standing beside my desk with a sweating brow. Leo, if they upload those leaked keys to the open web, our enterprise security reputation will take a hit before we can issue a patch. Quiet, I commanded softly. I set my espresso down on the glass desk. I pulled my sleek mechanical keyboard forward, my fingers hovering over the keys. They have the code, I said smoothly, my voice flat and icy. What they don't have is the master kill switch. You build a kill switch into the repository? I build a trapdoor into everything I create, I replied, dropping a razor-sharp smirk. Especially items I leave on servers accessible from my home. I typed a 6-character command line into my private terminal. Execute_purge_protocol_alpha. On the wall monitor, Julian was mid-sentence, grinning wildly for the main camera. And now, as you can see on the screens behind me, Apex Global is taking live control of. Beep. The giant projection screen behind Julian flickered violently. The blue code architecture instantly went black. A giant red lock icon filled the display, followed by bold white text scrolling rapidly in real time. Critical security breach detected. Unauthorized decryption key utility identified. Remote wipe initiated. What is that? Julian stammered, turning around to look at the massive screen. He banged his hand on the podium. Tech team, fix the feed. Switch to the backup server. There are no backup servers, Julian, I murmured to the monitor screen. A single keystroke later, I executed the master patent lock. The screen behind Julian shifted again. The black void was replaced by a high-resolution scan of the United States Patent and Trademark Office International Registry. My full legal name, Leo Alexander Vance ***, was highlighted in glowing neon blue, listing me as the 100% sole inventor of the Aegis Security Core, accompanied by a timestamp from 6 years prior. Right below it, a live system status window began wiping Julian's local drives, bricking his flash drive, and sending an automated criminal notification directly to the FBI Cybercrime Division. Wait, no! Julian shrieked, abandoning all pretense of suave confidence as his laptop began smoking slightly on the presentation table. Turn it off! Cut the power! The CNBC anchor's voice cut through the live feed, sharp and incredulous. It appears Apex Global's presentation has completely collapsed. Reports are coming in that their holding stock has dropped 99% in 30 seconds. Chloe panicked, jumping out of her chair and scrambling toward the exit while hiding her face from the cameras. But the double doors of the ballroom slammed open first. 4 uniformed NYPD officers and 2 federal cyber agents marched down the center aisle, pushing past the stunned reporters. Julian Mercer, the lead officer called out, stepping up onto the stage and grabbing Julian's arm. You are under arrest for federal theft of trade secrets, extortion, and illegal computer intrusion. This is a mistake, Julian screamed, his face twisting and ugly, tearful terror as steel handcuffs snapped around his wrists on national television. Chloe gave me the files. She said it was hers. Blame her. I leaned back in my executive leather chair, taking one last sip of my espresso. Checkmate, I whispered softly to the empty room. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glistened with crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, and Manhattan's top 1%. I stood near the marble balcony overlooking the floor, wearing a custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. I held a crystal tumbler of single malt scotch, watching the city's power brokers mingle below. My company stock had jumped 12% after Julian's arrest, and my reputation as an ironclad CEO was fully cemented. Leo, a soft, trembling voice called out behind me. I didn't flinch. I took a slow sip of scotch, turning my head with clinical indifference. Chloe stood 3 feet away, wearing an emerald green gown that still had the rented boutique tag barely tucked under the innerseam. Her hair was done. Her makeup was flawless, but her eyes held a hollow, desperate panic. Without her mother's money or Julian's backing, she was a ghost wandering high society. Chloe, I said, my voice smooth, cold, and entirely unbothered. I'm surprised you managed to get past security. Did you sneak in through the catering entrance? Her lips quivered, and she took a delicate step forward, hands clasped together in a textbook display of manufactured remorse. Leo, please, just hear me out, she whimpered, letting a single, artful tear spill down her cheek. I made a terrible mistake. My mother manipulated me. Julian lied to me. They convinced me you didn't love me, that you were using me. You needed 2 co-conspirators to convince you to commit corporate espionage? I replied, dropping a razor-sharp smirk. That speaks very poorly of your independent thinking skills. I was hurting, she gasped, taking another step closer and reaching her manicured hand out toward my arm. I miss us, Leo. I miss our life. We used to be a team. I don't care about the money or the shares anymore. I just want my husband back. Don't touch the suit, I commanded softly. Her hand froze 2 inches from my sleeve. You don't want your husband back, Chloe, I said, looking down at her with unyielding authority. You want your black card back. You want your luxury apartment back. You want access to a bank account that doesn't belong to you. That's not true, she cried, her voice rising enough to draw the attention of a nearby real estate mogul and his wife. I will drop every single pending lawsuit today. I'll fire my legal team. We can sign a new agreement. Anything you want. Just give me a second chance. I almost laughed out loud at the sheer, pathetic absurdity of her negotiation strategy. She was offering to drop lawsuits that were already being dismissed by federal judges. You're offering me air, Chloe, I murmured. You have no leverage. You have no assets. You have no standing. Before she could launch into another dramatic monologue, the orchestra quieted down, and the gala's host stepped up to the podium on the central stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the host announced through the microphone, we are honored tonight to have the chairman of Vance Logistics with us. Mr. Leo Vance has a special announcement. The room erupted into polite applause. Every eye in the ballroom turned toward the marble balcony. I didn't rush. I casually handed my empty glass to a passing waiter, adjusted my silk cuffs, and stepped up to the balcony railing. Chloe tried to step beside me to share the spotlight, but I subtly shifted my posture, cutting her off entirely and leaving her standing alone in the shadows behind me. Thank you, I said into the roving lapel microphone, my voice carrying effortlessly across the grand room. Tonight, Vance Logistics is proud to announce a $50 million endowment to the Metropolitan Children's Hospital. The ballroom erupted into loud cheers and thunderous applause. High society matriarchs nodded in approval, and photographers clicked away rapidly. And to ensure these funds are protected with absolute integrity, I continued, pointing down toward a sharp, strikingly beautiful woman in a sharp white tuxedo suit sitting at table 1. I am officially introducing our new chief legal partner, Ms. Elena Rostova. She will oversee all charitable trusts and corporate asset security going forward. Elena raised her champagne glass to me with a brilliant, confident smile. Chloe's face turned completely white. She knew who Elena was. Elena was the most ruthless corporate litigation attorney in the country. The woman who had dismantled Fortune 500 cartels without breaking a sweat. I stepped back from the railing as the applause continued. I turned around to face Chloe, who was trembling so violently she looked like she might collapse onto the marble floor. Why? Why are you doing this to me? She whispered, her dramatic act completely dead, replaced by raw, terrified reality. I'm not doing anything to you, Chloe. I'm simply letting arithmetic take its course, I said flatly, pulling my phone from my tuxedo pocket and tapping the screen. 3 hours ago, my legal team formally lifted the freeze on your secondary bank accounts. Her eyes flickered with a sudden, desperate flash of hope. You unfroze my accounts? Of course, I replied with a razor-sharp, icy smirk. Because the moment those accounts unfroze, your high-profile defense attorneys automatically process their retainer fees. $2.8 million for their work on your failed lawsuits. Chloe gasped, staggering backward as her hand flew to her mouth. What? Your balance is currently negative $400,000. I informed her smoothly, pocketing my phone. You're officially bankrupt, Chloe. And since you signed our prenup, not a single cent of my $50 million donation, or my personal net worth, will ever rescue you. Leo, please. She sobbed, dropping all pretense, begging like a child on the grand floor. Security, I called out calmly. 2 uniformed guards immediately stepped onto the balcony, placing their gloved hands firmly on Chloe's shoulders. Escort this woman off the premises, I ordered coldly. She doesn't have a ticket. I turned my back on her as she was dragged away screaming, picked up a fresh glass of scotch from a tray, and took a slow, satisfying sip. The air was completely clear. The conference table in my law firm's high-security settlement suite was 30 feet of solid, dark-stained walnut. I sat at the head of it, leaning back comfortably in my executive chair, capping my custom fountain pen with a quiet, authoritative click. Across from me sat Chloe, looking pale, hollow, and visibly shaking in a plain gray tracksuit. Beside her was a sweat-drenched, overworked public defender holding a battered leather briefcase. The contrast was poetic. 2 weeks ago, she was wearing custom gowns and threatening my corporate empire. Today, she looked like a ghost awaiting sentencing. Leo, please, Chloe began, her voice hoarse and trembling, trying to conjure one last performance of fragile victimhood. You don't have to do this to me. We were married. I was young. I was naive. My mother and Julian forced me into that lifestyle. They controlled me. You were 26 years old, Chloe, I said smoothly, my tone flat, razor-sharp, and utterly unimpressed. Not a child led astray in the woods. You signed corporate credit applications with your own manicured hands. I was emotionally dependent on you, she sobbed, leaning over the walnut table, her bloodshot eyes pleading. You worked all the time. You ignored me. You pushed me right into their arms. I almost laughed at the sheer, pathetic desperation of her script. It was always someone else's fault. I was building a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, I replied calmly. You were building a collection of designer handbags using stolen corporate funds. Do not confuse emotional neglect with your personal desire for grand larceny. Mr. Vance, her public defender interjected, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. My client is facing serious federal co-conspirator charges alongside Victoria Sterling and Julian Mercer. The U.S. Attorney's Office is pushing for a 10-year mandatory minimum sentence. We are begging for civil leniency. Leniency is a concept reserved for genuine mistakes. My lead attorney, Elena Rostova, said crisply from my right. Elena didn't waste time. She opened a thick black leather binder and slid a 70-page, itemized audit across the polished table, letting it land right against Chloe's trembling wrists with a heavy thud. Page 1 through 30, Elena announced coldly. An exact line-item breakdown of every unauthorized luxury purchase, jewelry acquisition, wire transfer, and sports car lease executed through Mr. Vance's secondary corporate accounts over 36 months. Total value, $4.7 million. Chloe stared at the rows of numbers, her mouth quivering. I can't pay this back. You know I don't have $4 million. Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting, I said, leaning forward and resting my hands flat on the table, staring straight into her terrified eyes. You have precisely 2 options on the table today, Chloe. There is no option 3. She swallowed hard, clutching the edge of the table. What options? Option A, Elena declared, sliding a 2-page legal surrender agreement forward. You execute a full, immediate surrender of every physical asset in your possession. That includes your diamond engagement ring, your luxury vehicle leases, your designer wardrobe, your offshore jewelry vaults, and your remaining private trust assets. In exchange, Mr. Vance will execute a civil debt satisfaction waiver, taking your name off the federal restitution list. Chloe's eyes went wide with pure, selfish horror. You want my jewelry? My clothes? Those were gifts. Gifts purchased with embezzled capital. I corrected flatly, dropping an icy, mocking smirk. They aren't your possessions, Chloe. They are evidence. And what is option B? Her public defender asked quietly, already knowing the answer. Option B, I said, my voice cutting through the silent room like a razor blade, as I hand this audit directly to the federal prosecutor waiting down the hall. You go to trial alongside your mother and Julian. With the paper trail I hold, you will receive the full 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. 10 years! Chloe shrieked, bursting into violent, uncontrollable tears. I can't go to prison, Leo. I won't survive in prison. Then I suggest you pick up the pen, I said smoothly. I slid my heavy silver fountain pen across the dark wood until the nib tapped against the signature line of the asset liquidation agreement. You wanted my wealth, Chloe, I whispered softly. You played the game, you cheated, and now you pay the house. Chloe looked at her attorney, but he simply lowered his head and shook it in silent, brutal defeat. There was no defense. There was no escape. With tears streaming down her blotchy face and her entire body shaking in hysterical agony, Chloe grabbed the silver pen. She pressed the nib to the paper, signing away her high society life, her jewelry, her cars, and her pride in 3 jagged, messy strokes. Asterisk clog. 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 Asterisk. Elena picked up the executed document, inspected the signature with a satisfied nod, and tucked it into her leather briefcase. Pleasure doing business with you, Chloe, I murmured, standing up from my chair and buttoning my custom suit jacket. Enjoy the bus ride home. I turned my back on her weeping frame and walked out the door into the clear afternoon light. The private elevator directly accessing my top-floor executive suite chimed softly. I sat behind my massive mahogany desk, 70 stories above the city. I was reviewing the preliminary Q3 revenue reports for Vance Logistics. My pulse was steady, my mind clear. The heavy glass doors slid open, and Marcus, my chief of security, stepped out first. Behind him walked Chloe. She wore a faded, oversized gray trench coat over jeans. Her hands were raw and unmanicured, her dark hair pulled back into a messy, hasty ponytail. No entourage, no cameras, no designer handbags, just a woman stripped entirely down to zero. She walked slowly toward my desk, stopping 3 feet short of the dark wood. She reached into her coat pocket with trembling fingers, pulled out a heavy brass key ring containing the master keys to my estate, and set it on the desk with a dull, metallic clink. The house keys, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And the valet pass for the garage. I didn't pick up the keys. I casually capped my silver fountain pen with an authoritative click and set it beside my blotter. Thank you, Chloe, I said smoothly, my tone flat, razor-sharp, and unbothered. Marcus will inspect the estate property at 4 p.m. If everything is in order, your civil settlement file will be formally closed. Chloe stood there, biting her lip so hard a faint drop of blood appeared. She shifted her weight, looking around my sprawling, floor-to-ceiling glass office, a room she once bragged about owning half of on her social media streams. Leo, she choked out, taking a small, desperate step forward. I handed over everything, my cars, my jewelry, my trust fund accounts. I have literally nothing left. My mother was sentenced to 12 years this morning. Julian is in a federal holding facility. I know, I replied coldly, dropping a faint, razor-thin smirk. I received the court alerts 30 minutes ago. Systemic justice moves with satisfying speed. I don't have a place to stay, she sobbed, clutching her arms around her waist as tears welled in her bloodshot eyes. The hotels won't take my black card. It's declined. I can't even rent a studio apartment in Queens because my credit score dropped to 300. Please, Leo, I'm begging you, give me a small financial allowance. Just $50,000. Just enough to let me secure a small lease and get on my feet in New York. I almost laughed out loud at the unadulterated comedy of her request. After attempting to steal my corporate legacy, defame me on live television, and destroy my life, she was standing in my sanctuary asking for a stipend. $50,000? I murmured, resting my chin on my laced fingers. For what return on investment, Chloe? What value do you bring to my ledger? I was your wife, she shrieked, her composure breaking into raw, hysterical agony. I spent 3 years of my life with you. You have billions. 50,000 is pocket change to you. How can you be so heartless? My wealth is reserved for assets, Chloe, I said, leaning forward and locking my eyes on hers with unyielding, clinical authority. Not liabilities that attempt corporate espionage. You chose your alliance. You gambled your position on Julian's stolen code and your mother's greed. You lost. I have nowhere to go, she screamed, tears streaming down her pale, makeup-less cheeks. I'll be sleeping on the street. You have one place to go, I corrected flatly. I reached into my inner jacket pocket, pulled out a small, printed slip of stiff paper, and slid it smoothly across the dark mahogany desk until it tapped against her trembling knuckles. Chloe blinked through her tears, looking down at the paper. Greyhound lines, one-way pass. Departure, New York Port Authority, 2:15 p.m. Destination, Oak Creek, Nebraska. Her face drained of what little color remained. A bus ticket? To my hometown. Oak Creek, I said softly, my voice cutting through her panic breathing like an ice pick. Population 1,200. A 500-mile trip back to the tiny rural house you spent 10 years trying to pretend didn't exist. No, she whimpered, backing away from the desk in pure, horrified realization. I can't go back there. Everyone knows I left to marry a Manhattan billionaire. If I go back like this, I'll be the laughingstock of the entire town. Your 15 minutes of Manhattan fame are officially over, Chloe, I commanded with absolute cold certainty. No black cards, no penthouses, no media contracts, just a one-way bus ride back to where you started. You monster, she whimpered, her voice cracking as she clutched the bus ticket in her shaking hand. You ruined my life. You ruined your own life, I replied smoothly, picking up my scotch glass and taking a slow sip. I simply executed the settlement contract. I looked toward Marcus, who was standing quietly by the elevator doors. Marcus, I said flatly, clear my office. Escort Miss Sterling to the street level and ensure she doesn't miss her 2:15 bus. Yes, Chairman Vance, Marcus responded instantly, stepping forward and taking Chloe firmly by the elbow. Leo, please, don't do this, Chloe shrieked, kicking her legs as she was dragged toward the private elevator. Leo. The heavy glass doors slid shut, cutting off her pathetic wailing in an instant. I set my scotch glass down, picked up my silver fountain pen, and turned back to my Q3 revenue reports. The room was dead quiet, absolute, unshakable peace. 6 months after the purge, the financial news networks stopped debating my methods and started counting my money. I stood on the floor-to-ceiling glass balcony of the newly completed Vance Enterprises global headquarters, 75 floors above Wall Street. The late afternoon sun bathed the Manhattan skyline in a brilliant, fiery orange. Down below, the city hummed along to the pulse of my infrastructure. My tablet chimed on the railing. I picked it up with one hand, taking a slow sip of my 20-year-old single malt scotch. The main headline on the Bloomberg terminal read, Vance Enterprises breaks all-time annual revenue records. Net valuation passes $150 billion. The market had spoken. The corporate traders were neutralized, the stolen algorithms were reclaimed, and my expansion into 3 new continents was officially complete. I didn't feel relief, nor did I feel pride. I simply felt the quiet satisfaction of a flawless equation coming to its natural, logical conclusion. My executive assistant, Sarah, stepped onto the balcony with precise, quiet footsteps, holding a sleek black leather folder. Mr. Vance, Sarah said smoothly, her voice crisp and professional. The International Banking Syndicate is on standby for the final signing. All regulatory clearances for the Asian-Pacific Logistics acquisition have been granted. Excellent, I replied without turning around. Have Elena confirm the escrow parameters before we execute. Of course, Sarah said. She hesitated for half a second, holding her tablet in her left hand. Also, An update came through from our legal monitoring service regarding the restitution recovery program. Oh, I murmured, taking another sip of scotch. Is Victoria Sterling attempting another frivolous appeal from her prison cell? No, Sarah said, dropping a faint, knowing smile. Victoria's 12-year federal sentence was upheld without parole eligibility. But the legal team sent over a status report on Chloe Sterling. Sarah tapped her screen and handed the tablet to me. I looked down at the display. It showed a high-resolution surveillance photo attached to a local Midwest news clipping. Chloe stood behind the register of a discount box store in Oak Creek, Nebraska, wearing a faded blue polyester apron over a plain white shirt. Her fingernails were short, unpainted, and chipped. Her eyes were dull, rimmed with dark circles, devoid of the glossy, arrogant sparkle she once used to command Manhattan galas. Below the photo was an official court ledger entry, monthly garnishment attachment, $342.15 recovery directed to Vance Enterprises civil judgment account. She was working 40 hours a week at minimum wage, with 60% of her meager paycheck automatically seized by my corporate collection agency to pay down her $400,000 legal debt. At her current rate of payment, she would be 72 years old before she settled her balance with me. She filed a petition with the local county court last week, Sarah added quietly. She requested a hardship exemption to reduce the monthly garnishment so she could afford her rent on a one-bedroom apartment. And what was Elena's response? I asked, my tone flat, razor-sharp, and unbothered. Elena filed an immediate opposition, Sarah replied instantly. The motion was denied this morning. The full garnishment remains active. I stared at the image of my ex-wife scanning boxes of detergent for 3 seconds. No anger, no pity, no nostalgia, just pure, absolute emotional detachment. She had gambled my life's work for cheap status, and now she was simply paying the market price for her choices. Remove the tracking flag on her file, Sarah, I commanded softly, my voice smooth and icy. I don't need updates on retail workers. I swiped my thumb across the screen, closing the article, deleting the file, and wiping the news from my device forever. Understood, Mr. Vance, Sarah said, taking the tablet back with a crisp nod. I turned away from the golden skyline and walked back inside my massive, soundproof executive suite. I sat down behind my dark walnut desk, adjusting the cuffs of my bespoke suit jacket. Waiting on the center of my blotter was a thick, 90-page international expansion contract. The deal that would effectively double my company's valuation over the next 24 months and make Vance Enterprises an untouchable global sovereign. I pulled my heavy silver fountain pen from my pocket. I uncapped it with a single, firm, authoritative click. Get the international syndicate on the line, Sarah, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet office with absolute, unshakable authority. It's time to sign. I pressed the pen nib to the crisp paper, executing my signature in bold, confident strokes. The game was over. The empire was mine.